NAIC just concluded. Now it's time to look at what the top decks are post NAIC. These are the best decks in the format after the tournament. Now that we have some pretty good results to look at here in the Destined Rivals meta, it's time to look at what the top decks are in this format. What decks you got to expect to hit in any tournaments you might be going to, if any there's League Cups coming up at any point in the future. These are the decks you have to keep your eye out for. So without further ado, let's get into the video. It's crazy how 2 NAICs in a row, Gardevoir is still coming out on top as arguably the best deck in the format. Now, of course, we got Isaiah Bradner's Gardevoir list here, which I think is probably the best way to play Gardevoir at the moment, just because it has the best chance of beating some of the bigger decks in the meta, like the Grimmsnarl and the Dragapult decks. Having Quad Monkey Dory makes a big difference in this deck, because if you can make your board all monkeys, you could definitely have a better matchup into Grimmsnarl, which will still be very popular post NAIC, and Dragapult probably won't be going anywhere soon, as there is a ton of Dragapult variants you have to keep your eye out for going forward, in my opinion. I think Gardevoir definitely is still going to be the top dog in the format, and you definitely have to be ready to play against a lot of Gardevoir still going forward, as it's probably going to be the best deck in the format. It may take a bit of a weaker matchup into stuff like Grimmsnarl and Charizard, but again, having the Quad Monkey Dory definitely does help make a difference. I think this deck definitely seems really strong, and the Isaiah Bradner build probably is going to be the best way to play. You can still experiment with different concepts, like playing the Drifloon can still be good, or having something like Shaman in the deck definitely can help the deck out too. But yeah, Gardevoir definitely is, in my opinion, the best deck right now, post NAIC, so had to include it in the video. Gardevoir might be the best deck, but I do think that Dragapult is still very close behind it. And what's interesting about Dragapult are all the different variations of the deck right now. Now, since Tord Reklev got top 4 with his straight Dragapult deck, I think this will probably be the most common way Dragapult will be played right now going forward after NAIC because of Tord's influence. And this deck is still very, very powerful. Having the Neo Upper Energy allows you to be more aggressive with your Dragapult, also allowing you to free up more energy attachments onto stuff like your Monkey Dory. Tord's list here is pretty straightforward with what it's trying to do. You just have the 2 monkeys, the 2 Budu, does have that Blood Moon or Saluna alongside the Latias, and has a Maractus in the deck also, which can be very sneaky with its corner attack. But Tord's list is definitely fairly strong. 4 research, 4 Iono, 3 Brock Scouting, 4 Boss, just straight consistency, even having the double Turo in the deck, which can be very good. There is 1 Jamming Tower, which will help a little bit against Gardevoir, especially when you're trying to shut off Bravery Charm on the Drifloon or the Clefairy. But yeah, the Dragapult build is still pretty powerful, and Tord was able to maneuver his way through a few Gardevoirs to make it as far as he did in the tournament, so clearly Tord knows what he's doing, and this deck definitely can take down the Gardevoir EX matchup, which might seem slightly unfavored as this deck doesn't have any ghosts in it, but I think that straight pull is probably going to be the most common way we're going to see Dragapult see play at the moment, just because Tord was able to have a top 4 finish with the deck. The more common Dragapult pick at NAIC was, of course, playing Dragapult with Dusknoir, as Dusknoir does provide a lot of utility for the deck, as it allows you to clean up some of your worst matchups, like helps a lot against Gardevoir, and can be a lot more helpful into the Grimmsnarl matchup. The downside of the Dusknoir build is you are giving up those prizes, you're potentially a little bit slower as you want to try to take a lot more turns off using Budu while you slowly build up your board, and you don't have as many Monkey Dories in the deck, but the deck is still very powerful, and it was one of the more common Dragapult decks that we saw at the top tables at NAIC. While I think the straight pull build might be a little bit more popular going forward just because it was Tord who played it and people want to play the Tord deck, the Dragapult Dusknoir build is also still very powerful, and maybe even have more of an advantage in the mirror match because you actually have the ghosts at your disposal. This deck is very, very powerful, and don't be surprised if Dragapult Dusknoir also starts doing a lot better, because like I said, this one probably has a better matchup into Gardevoir than the Tord build, but again, Tord did maneuver his way through a lot of Guardy decks at the tournament, so who knows, maybe Tord's build is actually still really good into Guardy. I'm not too sure, but yeah, Pult Ghost definitely still very strong post NAIC, and still probably one of the top decks right now for sure. Grimmsnarl EX got a lot of hype coming out of Destined Rivals and did see quite a bit of play at NAIC, but didn't really have the placements I think everybody was expecting, but at least one did make top 8 at NAIC, and I think this deck is still going to be very popular and played going forward. It is a very powerful archetype still at the end of the day, and even though it didn't win NAIC, which it easily could have won NAIC with all the Gardevoir that was in top 8, I don't think you should underestimate the power of Grimmsnarl still, and you should still take this deck very seriously. I know the deck was probably a little bit more heavily teched for this weekend, as the first place Guardy list that Bradner played was obviously built to beat Grimmsnarl by playing Quad Monkey Dory, and a lot of the Dragapult lists were also playing a Monkey Dory in them to help counter this deck. But yeah, Grimmsnarl Frostlass is still a great deck in my opinion, and it still managed to get top 8 at NAIC, and is still going to see a lot of play going forward. I don't think it's going anywhere. It might have to make some adaptations, and maybe we'll see some more changes being made to Grimmsnarl to make it more powerful and more consistent going forward, and maybe there are ways you can build a Grimmsnarl list to help adapt to the changes in the format by all the Guardies and the Dragapults getting more popular now, using heavier counts of cards like Monkey Dory. story. But yeah, Grimmsnarl's still great, and you definitely still got to expect to see this deck a lot at tournaments going forward, as this deck probably will not be going anywhere anytime soon. The next Dragapult deck I had to talk about here was going to be Dragapult Charizard EX. Charizard is a pretty good card in our format right now, and pairing it with Dragapult makes a lot of sense, especially going into NAIC, because a lot of players who played the deck weren't sure that Dragapult could carry its own against the Gardevoir and the Grimmsnarl matchup, so squeezing a Charizard in your deck definitely does help make a difference. And Charizard obviously is a very powerful attacker to have in the deck, because it does give you a really good beat stick attacker that ramps up damage as the game goes on. Dragapult is a great early game card to have, and then obviously Charizard can be good to clean up stuff in the late game in some matchups. It really does help fix your Guardy and your Raging Bolt matchup, especially having that big attacker. This deck had 2 of this in the ASIM at NAIC, and it was a fairly popular deck actually throughout the weekend. Dragapult Charizard was one of the more like underdog type decks in the past couple formats, but now at NAIC this deck definitely is making a name for itself, and I think it's going to be a top contender for now going forward here. The 60 here that Makani and Ryan and Shuchi both played to NAIC, making ASIM I think is pretty solid. It's got the Monkey in there, the Budu, the Hawlucha for your extra cards, alongside having the big EX cards in the deck. I've seen some Dragapult Charizard lists playing Chiyu, which can help a little bit against Goldengo, which I think Goldengo will still be fairly popular within this format. But yeah, Polzard is a very strong deck still, and I definitely would expect to see this deck still be heavily played. It's interesting, if your opponent flips over a Dreepy, you have to either expect them to bench Duskulls, bench no Duskulls, and bench multiple Monkeys, or have a Charmander back up on your bench. It's kind of crazy all the different Dragapult variants right now, but Pulsar definitely is one of the better ones, and one that you definitely still have to keep your eye out for going forward, in my opinion. The most played deck at NAIC was Raging Bolt, and I'm not surprised to see the deck have such a good showing, as I think this deck is still insanely powerful. It's a lot better than the old Raging Bolt list we had in the past formats, where you would rely solely on cards like Greninja and Pokestop and Squawkabilly. You were more of a fast turbo deck, where this build of Raging Bolt is a lot more stronger and a lot more scary to play against, mainly because it now plays Noctowl, which makes their deck even more consistent and allows them to do whatever they want a lot more consistently. It's actually a very hard deck to play against sometimes if your deck doesn't have the ability to keep up with this deck's momentum and tempo that it can apply, and I think it is still a great deck going forward. We did see Isaiah Bradner's list didn't run any Shaman in the deck, which is actually a big deal for this deck, as you get to abuse the baby Raging Bolt a lot more. If we see Shaman get cut from more stuff like Grimmsnarl and from Dragapult, this deck is even better because you can abuse the baby Raging Bolt even more and start sniping stuff off. I think Raging Bolt is still a great deck, and it probably does have a better matchup into stuff like the Tord build of Dragapult, and even into the Grimmsnarl matchup overall. You might struggle more against Guardy, obviously. That's still going to be your weakest matchup at the end of the day, but I think Raging Bolt can still beat it, and it's still a very scary deck to play against. Like I said, it's very fast, very aggressive. Being able to choose whatever you want to do in a turn with the help of Noctowl early on in the game makes this deck's early game really, really scary, especially if your deck is a bit more slower and can't keep up with the aggressiveness of Raging Bolt. Yeah, Raging Bolt is a great deck right now, and I still think it'll be very popular in our meta. Even if it didn't make top 8 at NAIC, I think the deck will still be popular and will still be heavily played, as it is still a very strong deck and can win a lot of games just by out-tempoing the opponent before they really get to do anything. So you definitely still got to respect Raging Bolt, in my opinion. Flareon is also a very powerful deck still in our meta. It's just not as heavily played as other decks, mainly because it's a bit harder to pilot. We did see one Flareon in ASIM at NAIC, and I think this deck is actually still great going forward. Part of what makes it so good is the toolbox of options you have access to. You have access to Sylveon, which can be very useful against the big evolution decks, like against Pulsar. It can be really good. It can be good into Dragapult. It can be good into even Gardevoir in some scenarios. And at the end of the day, you do get the Leafeon, which will help a lot versus stuff like the Dragapult Charizard deck, and does a lot of work versus Grimmsnarl, specifically making this deck great against some of the top decks in our format. You also have some great checkmate plays with Briar, allowing you to win games a lot more easily against stuff like Raging Bolt, Joltik Box, and even against Goldengo. So yeah, Flareon I think is still very powerful. I just don't think it's going to be as popular by a lot of players, because people just don't want to play a deck that's this hard to play. But even though the deck is a lot more harder to pilot than other decks, I think it's still a great pick going forward. And if you really put a lot of time and practice in with this deck, you know your lines, you know your matchups, and you know what to do in each situation, I think this deck's actually going to take you pretty far going forward. It might still be a great pick going into the World Championships. And I mean, if you have any cups and challenges coming out in the new seasons after July, this definitely might be a good pick, in my opinion, as a great anti-meta deck. So yeah, Flareon I think is still very powerful, and is, in my opinion, still one of the top decks you can play right now in the format. Goldengo didn't do as good at NAIC as I thought it would. I even played it to NAIC, and I wasn't really as impressed with it. And well, I think Goldengo is definitely a lot weaker now than it was in past formats. I think the deck is actually still very strong regardless. It still has a great matchup into Gardevoir. In fact, I would say it has the best matchup into Gardevoir, maybe out of any deck in the format right now. Yes, even Grimmsnarl itself, because Gardevoir isn't really teching for Goldengo anymore, as they're not really playing the Drifloon right now. because of the Isaiah Bradner build, I think that Drifloon's popularity might decline, which is really good for Goldengo. Yeah, I think Goldengo is still in a great spot. You do have a lot of awkward matchups, though, along the way. Like, again, the Raging Bull matchup I don't think is fantastic, and I also think your Flareon matchup is quite abysmal. But Goldengo, at the end of the day, is still Goldengo, and it's still a very strong archetype to play right now and can still win a lot of games thanks to the power of eSearch Pro and being able to be very awkward to KO. I think the Pengo idea is still really good. Dragapult DX can really carry this deck quite far. It's a little bit more linear than it really needs to be, but I think Goldengo is still a great pick right now in our format. If you want a deck that actually does really good into both Dragapult and Gardevoir, it's probably a great pick, especially if everyone's going to be playing the Tord build of Dragapult, and they're not going to be putting Genesect in the deck, which I don't think they should be playing Genesect anyways. This deck will get even stronger into two of the big decks right now, Dragapult and Gardevoir. I think Goldengo still actually beats Grimmsnarl too. I think that matchup is also still fairly decent for Goldengo. So yeah, I still like Goldengo a lot. If you want a deck that can beat up on some of the top 3 decks, definitely pick up this deck and start playing it. Now, before I end things off here, I did want to mention some wild card decks and some under-the-radar decks I think you should still keep your eye out on, as they had pretty good showings at NAIC, and I think these decks might start picking up a little bit more steam going forward. The first one I wanted to mention was, of course, Toad's Cruel EX, which we did see Ray Chen run it back with a very good placement by making top 8 at NAIC. What makes Toad's Cruel so strong is I think it has a pretty solid matchup into both Dragapult and Grimmsnarl. Being able to block Phantom Dive while also hitting for weakness against Grimmsnarl is really powerful. With the baby Toad's Cruel, you do help a lot against stuff like even Raging Bolt, Gardevoir, and stuff like Goldengo can actually struggle against not being able to spam Night Stretcher. And the deck is just really fast and can take 1 hit KOs once you build up a lot of energy on your board. This deck is really, really cool. And the fact that it did so well, I think, is great for the deck. I think if people want to play and pick up a fun deck right now and don't want to play any of the top decks I just mentioned, Toad's Cruel is a pretty solid deck in my opinion. And I wouldn't be surprised if this deck still saw some decent success going forward. Joltik Box did flop a little bit at NAIC. It didn't really do as well as I think a lot of players would have expected, but I think Joltik Box is still a great deck right now. It still boasts a good matchup into Grimmsnarl, and even against the straight Dragapult deck, this deck might still do pretty well. The aggressive nature of Iron Hands can really go a long way. It's better into Dragapult with no Zard or Ghost, in my opinion, and if the Tord build does catch more steam, it's a great time to whip out the Iron Hands EX. I think Iron Hands would have a lot more value. You might still be okay into Gardevoir. Yeah, Joltik Box, still a great deck, and I mean, if you're still able to run people over really quickly with Iron Hands, I still would highly recommend trying out this deck. I don't think the deck is dead or anything, just because it didn't do as well at NAIC. And then, of course, I want to mention Zoroark, which, surprisingly enough, was able to make ASIM, or actually, no, made top 8 at NAIC. I wasn't expecting to see Zoroark do so well this tournament, as I thought the deck was going to be a little bit more weaker because of Shaman, but no, the deck still had a good showing. There's a lot of other unique Zoroark variants that did make day 2 at NAIC. We even saw Stefan Ivanov with a cool Dragapult and Zoroark deck. I mean, being able to attack with Zoroark, I think, is great. I mean, one of the things that made Grimmsnarl and Charizard so successful this weekend was just having the ability to have a really strong Dark attacker in your deck. And Zoroark may not be as relying heavily on the Darmanitan anymore, as you can just more or less rely on the power of Zoroark being able to copy Reshiram's attack. Yeah, this deck's really cool, and I'm definitely going to be looking into it more going forward, as I'm a big fan of playing Zoroark. I don't know, the deck ain't dead yet. Definitely try out the deck, because it might be good into Gardevoir, and if we're going to see a lot more Guardy right now in the format, then definitely give Zoroark a try. And then I do want to mention Garchomp EX, which is still looking like a really cool deck to come out of Destined Rivals. The deck had a better weekend than I expected. There's a lot more Garchomp in day 2 than I would have thought, and I think this deck could be worth looking into right now, especially if you want to play it before we get Tool Scrapper in our next set for Worlds, because, of course, Power Weight's going to lose a lot of value when people can just spam Tool Scrapper against you. But yeah, this Garchomp deck is really, really interesting, and I definitely wanted to shout it out because I think people might give it a try going into the later half of the Destined Rivals meta, as it did have a decent showing at NAIC, and I think it honestly isn't even that bad of a deck, and I think people just want to play something fun and new, and Garchomp definitely catches my interest. So I wanted to quick mention Garchomp here in today's video. But there you go, folks. Those are the best decks right now post NAIC. I think the best deck right now is still going to be Gardevoir, Dragapult, Grimmsnarl being the top 3, but yeah, I definitely think the meta is shaping up to be pretty interesting. I know we're kind of just seeing the same decks win over and over again with Gardevoir and Dragapult. It's unfortunate, but it's just kind of how cards are designed. We just aren't really seeing enough good counters to these cards, or at least these cards and decks can adapt to new cards like Grimmsnarl. But yeah, I think we'll still see a lot of Grimmsnarl going forward, even though it didn't win NAIC and it got so much hype going into the tournament. Grimmsnarl is still a great deck right now, and might even see more new archetypes like this Garchomp deck and even the Toadstool deck start making more waves as actual up-and-coming archetypes to keep your eye out for in the meta. But hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like. If you're new here to the second channel, make sure to subscribe down below. We're on the road to 24,000 subs here, and yeah, let me know what you thought of the video and all the good stuff, and I'll catch y'all later. Bye-bye.